Very good morning, everyone. Welcome you back. I welcome you back in this series of finance and economy editorial analysis. So here we are again with the editorials from all the major newspapers like ET, Business Line, Business Standards and Mint. Okay. So today there was no such important editorial related to economy or finance in the ET, Mint or Business Line. So I have taken up one editorial which was there in the Business Standard and on the editorial page, and one important news as well from the Business Standard which I found would be useful for you. So let's begin, and it is very interesting to know that this topic, as you all know. Okay, so you all must be aware of this news. Am I audible? Yes or no? Anyone? I am audible, right? Okay. So you must be aware of this news that LIC's public shareholding limit has been extended, or LIC has been provided with an extension of 3 years to increase its public shareholding up to 10%, okay, by the SEBI, which is our financial market regulator, okay. All right. So, can anyone let me know, am I audible or not? Yes? All right. Thank you so much. Okay. So, you must be aware of this news, right? But no, you know what, it is very interesting that in today's editorial, the author has tried to connect this news with fiscal deficit. If you are aware of fiscal deficit, it would be good. Otherwise, I will be explaining it to you anyways, right? So, let's see how it becomes very interesting to link these two things which are sounding very opposite to each other, okay? So, we will be dealing with these interrelations and connections explained in the editorial. Alright, so let's start with the news first, that LIC's public shareholding LIC has been required to maintain the minimum public shareholding of 10%, okay, and this was the screenshot from the editorial of Business Standard, as it has been titled as Rules of the Game. Alright, so let's move ahead. Now, the news is, or the fact is, LIC provided with an extension of 3 years to achieve 10% public shareholding. You all know this, right? There is a video as well on the YouTube regarding this news in the 5-minute series. So, first of all, let's understand what is this news, how is it important, how it unfolds for the LIC. So basically, first of all, let's understand what is public shareholding. What is public shareholding? Any idea? So in a company, what happens is that there are promoters. Okay, who are promoters? Promoters are those people who have devised the idea of establishing that company, done all the process required to run that company or establish that company or industry. All right. So there are certain shares owned by the promoters. Okay, but apart from promoters, when these shares are available for the financial investors, or say for institutional investors, or say retail investors, then we call it as public shareholding. Okay, so shareholding done or available for public, or say apart from the promoters. Is that clear? What is public shareholding? Yes? Alright, so this is the basic information. Now, why LIC is required to do that? Because in LIC, Government of India owns almost 96.5% of shares, right? So if it is available for public, or the public shareholding is more, then it becomes more easy to increase the liquidity and increase the price offerings, or to better the price offerings, or to increase the betterment in price offerings to the public. Okay, so this is the news. Now the author says how he has started the connection. Just try to understand. Okay, the author says that there have been loopholes, some glitches in Indian policy establishments, in Indian policy making or establishments, that they have been unstable to capitalize upon these good initiatives. So this is one of the good decisions taken by SEBI. Okay, but the author has said that Indian government or Indian policy making and institutions are lacking somewhere to capitalize upon or to take advantage of these kind of initiatives. Let's see how and what is the author talking about. Okay, now, so example given by the author is disinvestment, like disinvestment. So in case of disinvestment, government has lagged behind. Otherwise, the government could have capitalized upon this opportunity of disinvestment through LIC and through many entities which are listed over there, right? So let's see how it happens. What is disinvestment? First of all, so we'll try understand every concept which comes in the series as well. What is disinvestment? Any idea? Do you know what is disinvestment? So disinvestment is basically a process through which the government sells its shares of a public sector undertaking. So it is opposite of investing, right? So say suppose you have purchased shares or stocks, so you have invested, but when you sell out those shares, you have disinvested them. Why does government do that? It is a method of raising resources, raising funds by selling out some of your shares. Is that clear? Yeah, so this is disinvestment. And let me tell you one more thing. One more thing. So we'll relate and connect finance and economy and all these terms together, so that you get to prepare a very wholesome kind of subject, right? So when I say disinvestment, always remember that disinvestment is an example of capital receipts. It can also be asked in any of your examination in say one-liner or any other questions, right? So disinvestments are capital receipts. What are capital receipts? I'll explain it first, then I'll move further in this series. Okay, let me explain it. What are capital receipts? Just a second, sorry for this. Okay, what are capital receipts? See, capital receipts in budget, as you know, budget is presented. Budget is a statement of expected revenue and expenditure of the government of India. Yes, every year presented by the Honorable Finance Minister. Okay, so budget has broadly two categories. Budget has broadly two categories. Okay, the budget has broadly two categories. One is revenue receipts, and the other is capital receipts. Capital receipts. Okay, revenue receipts and capital receipts. So all the revenue which are generated, and it has two subheads under this. Okay, what has happened? I don't know. It is hanging up. Sorry for this. Okay, anyways, let's move further. So revenue receipts and capital receipts. The receipts of the government, the revenue which is earned by the government, is classified into either revenue receipts or capital receipts, and the expenditure done by the government is classified into either revenue expenditure or capital expenditure. So both the things which the budget is all about, receipts and expenditure, okay, falls under these two categories. Alright, so what happens is, when I talk about capital receipts means the earnings of the government through such modus or through such methods not working. Okay. Okay, so there is a technical issue. Sorry for that. You will have to wait for 2 minutes. Okay, just wait for 2 minutes. We'll resume it again. It is disturbing again and again, and it has hanged up, not working. So just wait for 2 minutes. We'll begin again. Okay. All right, so let's begin again. Okay, there was some problem which has been resolved now. We'll start again, okay? So we have understood this news and now we are interlinking it with the fiscal deficit concept which has been provided in the editorial. So I was explaining capital receipts because here we are talking about disinvestment, okay? So I explained to you that when we have budget, in budget we have two heads, revenue and capital. In revenue and capital both we have expenditure and receipts, expenditure and receipts. So when I say disinvestment, it is a source of income for the government, but where would it come? It would come under capital receipts. How can you remember it? Always remember that in the revenue budget or revenue side, be it revenue expenditure, be it revenue receipts. In the revenue side of budget, there be it revenue expenditure or receipts, there will be no change in the status of assets and liabilities of the government, assets and liabilities. But in case of capital expenditure and receipts, so what happens in capital expenditure? Government creates assets like projects related to infrastructure, right? So when you invest in infrastructure, an asset has been created or a project related to any big industry. So it creates assets or reduces liabilities. But in capital receipts, it reduces assets or creates liability. This is the definition which you can remember. Capital receipts either create liability or reduces assets, right? So disinvestment, through disinvestment, government is earning although, but it is reducing the asset of the government. Did you get it? What is capital receipt? Right? So if government is selling say 2% of shares, so 2% of asset of the government has been reduced. Yes or no? Right? So this is what happens with the case of disinvestment. That's why I said always remember disinvestment is a capital receipt. Either assets get reduced or liability has been generated. Now let's move ahead. So the author says that like disinvestment, Government of India had planned to disinvest 5% of its shares in LIC. गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने प्लान किया था टू डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट 5% ऑफ इट शेयर्स इन LIC, ओके, एंड इंक्रीज इट फर्दर इन द कोर्स ऑफ टाइम in order to increase its performance and raise resources for the government. Why disinvestment is done? To raise the performance of that entity. What happens is when you disinvest, some private entity purchases it, and you always know that with private enterprises, efficiency, state-of-the-art technology, all these things come together, right? So when there is a private-public partnership, it can be a good example for economic growth. So this is what was the aim of the government, and also to raise funds. But similarly, the decision of SEBI, this decision of SEBI is Securities and Exchange Board of India, Financial Market Regulator of India. So decision of SEBI to increase the public float by asking the LIC to attain a minimum 10% of public shareholding by what time? By 16th of May 2027. Also aimed at increasing the market liquidity and offering better prices or better price discovery. But both the principles have been diluted. So the author says that both the principles have been diluted, be it on the government side or be it on the SEBI side. How? So here the author is trying to say that this decision of SEBI to extend it is a good decision. What is the aim of this decision? Basically to increase the public float. What is public float? When do we say public float? So public float means the shares which are available to be traded by the or purchased by the public, or again apart from the promoters of the company. Are you getting my point? Okay, so increase the public float and increase market liquidity. So if public float increases, liquidity in the market increases, people will have more to invest in or more to purchase. Are you getting my point? So this was the aim behind this decision. But what happened? We'll understand it in further course of time. What happened? That the author is saying that both the principles, government aimed at disinvesting the LIC, but it failed, and SEBI aims to increase market liquidity, but it seems to be diluted. This aim seems to be diluted. Let's see how it unfolds. Okay. just wait, what is happening? I don't know. Why is it hanging? All right, so this is your next slide. Okay, now, so author says that LIC was listed 2 years ago, okay, on NSE and BSE. This is how he is trying to explain what is happening. So as you all know that it was listed in what? Listed in NSE and BSE, National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange, in May 2022, almost 2 years ago, with just 3.5% of public float. With just 3.5% of public float. Public float means again that only 3.5% of the shares were available for the public apart from the promoters. Okay. So government was expected to sell these stakes further to increase the public float, but it did not do that. At that time, it was expected from the government to increase the selling out of these stakes or stocks of the LIC so that public float can increase. But government didn't do that. Okay, so remember, next, one of the reasons why government hesitated in doing that, because one of the reasons can be that this reluctance can be due to low performance of the LIC stock. When it was issued at say rupees 949, the price get deteriorated. So one of the reasons can be the low performance of the LIC stock. After it was issued at rupees 949, the price fell down to rupees 540 in 2023. So from 949, the price of it fell down to 540 in 2023. It could have been corrected. This shock could have been corrected if its public shares were increased. So, अगर इसका public float ज़्यादा होता, if its public shares were increased, this situation could have been corrected. So, here government lagged behind. Are you able to understand now? Yeah, LIC was not doing well. So, what happened is government lagged here. Okay, had it been the case that there were more public float, this situation could have been corrected. Okay, now see more and then we'll be able to interconnect all of them. After this price shock, there was a recovery as well. So it was not the case that it was declining continuously. No, there was a recovery as well, and the government of India, GOI here is government of India. So government of India could have disinvested at that time. Government of India could have disinvested when situation started recovering. Okay, its shares of the LIC to raise some resources and reduce its fiscal deficit. Government of India could have disinvested for two aims, to raise resources and to reduce fiscal deficit, but it did not do that. Okay, so here is the basic link which the author is trying to relate to or provide to you, that how can this disinvestment of LIC and such, increasing the public float, public shareholding can be related to reducing the fiscal deficit. These two concepts are sounding very opposite to each other, but they are interlinked. Now let's try and understand. Okay, yes, let's try and understand. So to understand this interlinkage, you first need to understand what is fiscal deficit. You first need to understand what is fiscal deficit. Any idea what is fiscal deficit? Anyone? Fiscal deficit. Import export? No. No, it is not import export. But see, what is the deficit? Just take it at your own. You all are preparing, okay? So some of you might be living outside of your home. You get some income or some, not income, you get some funds, okay, from your family. So say if you are provided with 10,000 rupees per month, and so your revenue is 10,000 rupees, but your expenditure is 12,000 per month, okay? So 2,000 is your deficit. Yes, expenditure is greater than receipts or revenue, right? So this is what happens with the government as well. We all have the budget issues at the end of the day, right? So fiscal deficit is when the total expenditure of the government is more than the total receipts. The total expenditure of the government is more than the total receipts. Is that clear? So what does it mean? And one thing you need to remember here is that it is apart from borrowings. Apart from borrowings. So this is a formula you should remember, very important for any of the examinations, but this is more important than the formula. That this formula, total expenditure minus total receipts, where expenditure is more than receipts, does not include the borrowings of the government. Does not include the borrowings of the government. Why does it not include the borrowings of the government? Because this deficit is financed by borrowing only. So if you include borrowing separately, that would lead to double counting and exaggeration of the figures. Are you able to get it? That the formula of fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus total receipts other than the borrowings of the government. Other than the borrowings. Remember this. Why borrowings excluded? Because this deficit is financed through borrowing only. So fiscal deficit already equals to borrowing. Say you have a deficit of 2000 rupees, okay? Your income is 10,000 per month and your expenditure is 12,000. So 2000 deficit, how would you finance that? You will borrow. So that borrowing will be equal to 2000 only, almost. So if we include borrowing in the formula as well, that would amount to 4000, which would be over calculation, double calculation and exaggeration of the figures. Right? It would not give a clear picture. So this is your fiscal deficit. Now what happens is, there is an act of by Parliament, the FRBM Act. FRBM Act. The FRBM Act. Okay. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Budget Management Act 2003. Okay. So FRBM Act is there. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This act was implemented to contain all these deficits, to provide a roadmap to the government so that the policy, fiscal policy, can be prudent. What is fiscal policy? As we have already discussed, that it is the policy of the government, and there are two major tools in the fiscal policy: government expenditure and the taxes. So it is through expenditure and taxes that the government always affects the system, right? Tries to affect the economy, correct it. Okay. So this is what FRBM Act is. In FRBM Act, it has been mentioned, there have been many guidelines provided under FRBM Act. One of them is related to the targets of deficits. There are many more deficits. This is only one of them. So you have fiscal deficit, you have revenue deficit, you have primary deficit, then you have effective revenue deficit. Okay, so this is a part of budget chapter. All right, so we are talking about fiscal deficit. So FRBM Act says that your fiscal deficit should be kept at 3% of your GDP. 3% of your GDP. So remember, fiscal deficit target of India is 3% of GDP. Now, why are we trying to limit this deficit? Is there any harm? There must be some reason that there is an act which is providing a guideline that the government should keep the fiscal deficit, try to keep the fiscal deficit at 3% of the GDP, right? So there must be a story behind it. It is not coming out of vacuum. Okay. So do you know any of the reasons? Why is it so? Any explanation for that? Yes, see what happens is, when I'll explain it to you through a chain reaction, okay, then you will be able to understand that, okay, that's why the government should cap its fiscal deficit, otherwise it is loss of the common man and loss of the entire economy. How does it happen? Let's see. Say fiscal deficit increases, okay, fiscal deficit increases. So this marker has become camouflage, changing colors at its own, okay. Okay, so fiscal deficit increases. when fiscal deficit increases, directly what do you mean? That government is lacking behind receipts. Okay, so expenditure is more than the receipts. It means government's borrowing will increase, because fiscal deficit is nothing but what? Borrowing. Is that clear? So when borrowings increase, what happens is, there is one thing called crowding out effect. If you have heard about it, crowding out effect. Crowding out effect. What is crowding out effect? It happens, and due to this, economic activities will decline if there is more fiscal deficit. Let's see how. Crowding out effect. Suppose this is the amount, this is a pie chart, okay? I'm just roughly making it, so don't judge it. This is a pie chart you have. Suppose this much amount is available as in form of credit in the economy, okay? So you know that investment activities are done by taking loans from the bank. You don't have sufficient funds and you don't want to risk your funds, okay? So you take loans for investment. Is that clear? So there are private investors and the government also borrows from the market. So I say that in the market there is, say, this much share, not this much, but this much share available for as credit in the market, as credit. Now what happens is that when borrowings increases, the government fiscal deficit increases, government will increase borrowing, because the other option of printing new currency notes is the last option, because it increases inflation to very high levels. So it is not supposed to do that apart from some natural calamity or any other situation. Alright, so this is what is the option left. Now when government tries to borrow more from the market, this is your available limit. Say this is your available limit of credit in the market. Among it, there are private investors as well who need loan. There is government as well who need loan. Okay. So government borrows, say, this much amount. This red part. Okay. So this is borrowed by the government. Alright. So say this red part, red portion is the borrowing by the government. So it has reduced the total availability, isn't it? Yes or no? Now this much only is available, this much, yellow portion for private investors, this much only is available for private investors, isn't it? Are you able to understand this? So this much is only available. This is known as crowding out effect. So you have sucked out the credit availability for the investors from the market. Are you getting this? Yes or no? Anyone? So this much is only available, otherwise this was available, right? So what happens is, now less amount is available to be taken as loan. So this effect is known as crowding out effect, which is a result of higher fiscal deficits. Now let's understand the picture beyond crowding out effect. So if there is crowding out effect, there is less amount of credit available for private investors because government has increased its shares of borrowing. Now let's see what happens next. Okay. So next we have crowding out effect, which means less loan available. Less loan available, right? So if less loan available, the loans will be either become costlier, okay, costlier, because then interest will increase, costlier. So people or private investors will be taking less loans, so it means that investment activity will decline. Investment activity will decline. When investment falls, economic activities and production activities will fall. So your economic activities, production activities will fall. Okay. So stay connected to all these things. Economic activity falls, production falls. Production falls. Production is what? Nothing else but your GDP or national income. So when your GDP falls or national income falls, again the revenue of the government falls. Again the revenue for the government falls. Yes or no? Okay, so when again revenue falls, expenditure cannot be reduced. We are a very fastly developing economy, expenditure is rising continuously. Again there will be a fiscal deficit, revenue is less than the expenditure. Yes or no, right? So again fiscal deficit, again borrowings, and again that would be this spiral continuing. Are you getting my point? So this is one way it affects the economy, harms the economy, and the other way is that when borrowing increase, the credit which could have been used to invest in the economic activities has been diverted to pay the bills, or say to borrow from the market, which is not generating any economic activity in the market. Now are you able to understand why fiscal deficit is required to be kept up to 3% of GDP? Let me know. Yes? Right? So that's why I told you that in the fiscal deficit there is an FRBM Act and you need to cap or limit your fiscal deficit to 3% of GDP. So how can you do that? How can you reduce your fiscal deficit now? To reduce your fiscal deficit, you need to improve your revenue generation, your revenue receipts, right? You can cut out on inappropriate expenditures or the subsidies which are not required. So you need to have fiscal consolidation. There is this term called as fiscal consolidation. Fiscal ये हैंग क्यों हो रहा है बार बार, जस्ट वेट. Fiscal consolidation. Okay, so this term is also important for any of your exams. Fiscal consolidation means such policy or such acts by the government, such policy making which aims to reduce these deficits, all these types of budgetary deficits, and increase the resources for the government so that it can serve the public interest. Is that clear? So fiscal consolidating your budget, consolidating your policies, consolidating your receipts and resources. Are you getting my point? So how can you reduce fiscal deficit? By fiscal consolidation. Now to do fiscal consolidation, as you know that there are only two tools available with the government. Two tools available with the government. Which are these two tools? Either G, which is government expenditure, or T, which is taxation. So you know that government cannot reduce its expenditure on essential things because it is required for the development of the economy. But government can cut the inappropriate expenditures where there is no need of doing such expenditures, like unnecessary subsidies. Okay, so government can either cut the inappropriate expenditure, or government can increase the tax rates. Government can increase the tax rates, but as you all know that increasing the tax rates is also not a very viable option in India, because if we talk about direct taxes are those taxes which are levied on the income, or for example income tax, or for which the burden lies on the same person. When I say direct tax, it means then that the person who has been chosen to pay the tax will only pay the tax. The burden of taxation cannot be shifted in case of direct tax. So your income tax has to be paid by you only, right? But in case of indirect taxes, remember, indirect taxes, the burden of taxation or paying the tax can be shifted. As it happens, whenever you purchase something, it has MRP written over it. You pay taxes which are included in the MRP. So initially it was levied on someone else who has produced that product, but he has transferred the burden onto you, the end consumer. Yes, it can be shifted, right? So in case of India, you cannot earn so much out of income tax or direct taxes. Why? Because there is a lesser tax base, lesser population which comes under the tax bracket, income tax bracket. So that option is wiped out. Another thing is indirect taxation. So if you increase indirect taxation, that would affect the pocket directly of the common man, the common people. How? So if say indirect taxes are raised, so prices of all these products would increase, because if producer is paying more tax, he would charge more price from you, isn't it? That would affect the pocket of the consumer. Already we know there is so much of poverty and inequality in India. So that can also not be a viable option. Are you able to understand? So now what can government do? Government can increase, maximum which government can do is increase receipts or revenue generation as much as possible. Is this much clear? Now to increase receipts, there are various options. Tax receipts are there, non-tax receipts. In tax receipts, we have limitation. For economy like India, as I have explained, direct, indirect tax, you cannot increase it up to a limit, beyond the limit, right? But in non-tax receipts, like disinvestment, you can do that. When you are owning so much of shares, like in LIC 96.5 something, so much of shares, then you can disinvest some of them to earn resources so that you can reduce your fiscal deficit, so that economy gets less harmed. Now are you able to connect all these points? So this is how deeply the editorial talked about these two things. Okay, so let's get back to it. So therefore, after this price, author says that there was a recovery, government could have disinvestment. Now you can understand that through disinvestment, government could have raised resources and reduce its fiscal deficit, which is presently almost 5.9%. And the FRBM Act requires it to be 3% of GDP. So it is very beyond it. Okay. Is this clear? All right. So again, this relation is clear, right? How can disinvesting and this news of LIC can be used to reduce fiscal deficit? The author is emphasizing on a more severe problem, that this case of not capitalizing upon these opportunities of disinvestment is not only with the LIC, but it is a case with more than 20 listed companies or public sector entities. More than 20 listed public sector entities, like public sector banks. There are public sector banks owned by the government, right, where government of India has more than 75% share. So when you have more than 75% shares and even more than 90% in around 12 companies or more than 12 companies, so when you have so much of shares, why cannot you earn from them by disinvesting and then reduce your fiscal deficit so that the entire economy can get benefit out of it, right? So this is the linkage. With so high fiscal deficit, which is 5.9% as presented in the recent budget, government should not have ignored these opportunities to raise funds and serve public interest. It is still suggested to disinvest such shares and earn capital receipts to finance its deficit. Again, as I told you, capital receipts. So you remember, I told you that this investment is a capital receipt. Why? Because it is reducing asset, right? So either this kind of receipt either reduces your asset or creates a liability. So this was the picture about LIC's news regarding the extension of 10% share public shareholding and how you can relate it to the most prevalent problem, common problem and a very serious problem with Indian or public finance, which is fiscal deficit, higher fiscal deficits. We are unable to cap the fiscal deficit to the required limit under the FRBM Act of 2013. 3. So now tell me, is this connection clear now? What was the author trying to say in this editorial? Now you can read that editorial and you will be able to understand. Otherwise, it was very difficult to understand what actually he was trying to say. Is that clear? Right? So, interesting. You can see how multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach and writing skills develop. This is how they develop. You need to brainstorm. You need to interlink every concept. Everything can be connected together. Okay? But then we have one more news. So, the session is not ending here. Okay? So, we have one more news, which is this, that co-lending. So, it is basically a news, not as an editorial, but I found it interesting and it can be explained like an editorial. So, let's try to understand. This is also helpful for your understanding. Co-lending or co-origination of loans and finance minister's concerns regarding that. Co-lending, co-origination. So, what is in the news? In the news, this is the news from Business Standard. You can look into it. Finance Minister asks SBI, State Bank of India, to look into co-lending issues. Okay, so we'll see what is co-lending and what are these issues. So see, Finance Minister has recently asked the SBI, State Bank of India, to set up a special committee. A special committee is being formed to look upon why co-lending is not picking up in India. Okay, so first of all, let's understand what is co-lending. Co-lending means when there are two parties which can lend together. Okay, so as you all know that primarily lending activities are done by the commercial banks, okay, the banking system in India. But there is something called NBFC, non-banking financial companies. Are you aware of NBFCs? There are something called NBFCs, non-banking financial companies. Do you know what are NBFCs? So, NBFCs are basically those institutions which work as a bank, but there are differences. Okay, they can lend, they can give you loan, but the major difference between a bank and an NBFC is, can you tell me, anyone, what is the major difference between bank and an NBFC? The major difference is that bank can accept both demand deposits and term deposits. Yes, but the NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. NBFCs only accept deposits which are at least for 12 months. Are you getting my point? Yes. Okay. Broadly, this is the classification, and there are other differences as well. Although it can extend loan or credit to you, to the common man, but there are certain differences, like NBFCs will accept term deposits. So, the term deposit should be for at least 12 months. Okay. One more thing, the DICGC, deposit insurance guarantee, what is the full form of DICGC? Tell me. You must be knowing DICGC. Okay. So, there is insurance given by DICGC to the banks, deposit on the deposits with the banks, commercial banks, but there is no DICGC's insurance on the NBFC deposits. This is another difference, and this has been asked, I think, in some of the examination, if I am not wrong, right? Yes, deposit insurance and credit guarantee corporation, okay, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of RBI. Yes, wholly owned subsidiary of RBI. So, it gives insurance on banking deposits. Presently, I think around 5 lakh, maximum of 5 lakh, including your principal amount and your interest, okay, is being insured by DICGC in case of bank deposits. But in NBFCs, there is no insurance. So, these are certain differences. So, what is co-lending? Co-lending has been allowed by RBI, in which the banks and the NBFCs can extend loan together. They can form a coalition, or they can form a group, and they can co-work regarding that to extend loan. Why is this decision taken? To increase banking penetration or to increase credit penetration in the economy. So, this is the news. Co-lending or co-origination is a setup where banks and non-banks, which are non-banking financial companies, enter into an arrangement for the joint contribution of credit. So they can jointly contribute in the credit creating process for priority sectors. What are priority sectors? The sectors which are underserved, which require more credit to get developed, right? Like education, like MSME, small, medium and micro enterprises. Okay, yes, only 5 lakhs limit. Yes, is that clear? So for priority sector lending they can collaborate. What happens is sometimes bank does not have sufficient amount to extend loan to, right? And sometimes NBFCs do not have. So RBI has allowed them to collaborate regarding this. It would benefit the people residing in those areas which are underserved, where there is no branch, for example, of a bank, where there is less financial inclusion or less banking penetration. Okay, so this has been the news. Now to put it simply, under this arrangement both banks and NBFCs share the risk in a ratio of 80-20. Also remember this, that NBFCs are allowed in the co-lending process or arrangement, NBFCs are allowed only to extend 20% of the credit, limit up to 20%. Yes, only 20% is allowed for the NBFCs and the 80% would be done by the banks. Is that clear? 80% would be done by the banks. So 80-20 ratio, 80 by banks, 20% by NBFCs. Okay, co-lending was allowed by RBI to increase credit penetration and financial inclusion. Now these two terms are also very important. So the aim of this news is, why are we dealing with news, is because this concept is important. What is co-lending? You must know this, and because RBI and all other banks are promoting it, finance ministry is also promoting it. Okay, and what is credit penetration and financial inclusion? Credit penetration, to increase the reach of credit availability into the economy. There are areas where the availability of credit is not so easy or is not there even, right? Or the credit is costlier. So the banks are required to do priority sector lending. The other thing is financial inclusion. Do you know what is financial inclusion? Do you know what is financial inclusion? Very important topic. Financial inclusion is basically, as the name is suggesting, process of integrating more and more people with your financial services or banks, right? Financial inclusion, include more and more people, join more and more people with the mainstream finances, which is banking activities and other activities, right? To increase credit availability, to increase the banking habit of people, depositing habit of people, so that the savings of the people which are lying somewhere in the chini ka dibba or aate ka dibba in the kitchen, to redirect it towards the banks. Are you able to understand that? Because that money which is in the kitchen in some dibbas is not useful for the economy, but the money which comes as in part of savings or as form of deposits into the banking system becomes a source of investment, because out of that fund only bank is going to lend to the investors. So it is useful for national income as a whole. So financial inclusion is that process. And one more thing, just an information for you which you can remember for your exams, that this word financial inclusion in India was given by a committee which had two important members. So remember these two names, C. Rangarajan and Raghuram Rajan committee. Very prominent people, you must be knowing about them. So C. Rangarajan and Raghuram Rajan. C. Rangarajan and Raghuram Rajan committee. C. Rangarajan and Raghuram Rajan committee. So this financial inclusion was given by C. Rangarajan and Raghuram Rajan committee in India. And for credit penetration, I would like to give you one more information, that there is an index which you can refer and regarding which you can get questions in your examination, which is known as CRISIL's Inclusive Index. CRISIL's Inclusive Index. Okay. Inclusive by CRISIL. CRISIL, you all must be knowing about CRISIL. CRISIL is a credit rating agency, as you all know, right? CRISIL is a credit rating agency which gives credit rating. So it releases an index called as Include6, which measures certain things like credit penetration, banks branch penetration, deposit penetration, insurance penetration. So around 4 indicators are there. So it tries to rank countries on the basis of these indicators and give an overview of financial inclusion, how much financial inclusion is there. So it basically a measure of measuring the financial inclusion success of India. Okay, so you must know this index Include6, released by CRISIL, and it measures the data on per lakh people. Okay, so this is financial inclusion index Include6. This was the news of co-lending. Again, this is very important, and these are some related concepts. The editorial is clear that how disinvestment and how this news of LIC, SEBI has realized the importance that there should be increase in public float, there should be more public shareholding apart from the promoters. So that's what was the news, and how do we connect it to the public finance or the fiscal deficits. Alright, I hope this session was useful today for you, and there were some technical problems in this session, so sorry for that. We'll try to solve it out in before the next session, right? So sometimes it gets hanged, that's why such problem arises. So I hope that would be useful. So stay tuned, we'll get so many interesting editorials like this, and through these editorials you will be able to brainstorm. Your mind will open up that okay, how differently sounding two concepts which are sounding like polar parts can be interrelated together, and these concepts will also be clear to you all. Okay, all right, I'll see you in the next session, which is tomorrow. Till then, good luck. Have a great day. Thank you.